Today on SUTV News, fake news. Experts say we should worry about its consequences, but consumers aren't so sure. We examine this issue on a special report coming up next. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ian Fitzgerald.
And I'm Zach Salzgiver. The phrase fake news abounds in the media, political circles and comment sections of the news articles, but one person's fake news is another person's indication of bias. Ryan Smetzer has more.
In November 2016, Donald Trump defied polls and naysayers to secure a spot as leader of the free world. With all signs pointing toward a Hillary Clinton victory, this left many to wonder, what the heck happened? Then came the intelligence community's conclusion that Russia had tried to influence the election in Donald Trump's favor. One of the factors, former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper pointed at, misinformation.
And so all of these other modes, whether it was RT, use of social media, fake news.
Professionals, including Stanford economist Matthew Genskow, were quick to diagnose fake news as one of the prevailing reasons why Trump was able to pull off the upset over Clinton. A Google Trends report shows an exponential increase in searches for the phrase fake news right around Election Day, eventually peaking with President Trump's inauguration.
Members of the media, politicians, and academic professionals thought that fake news referred to articles making fantastical claims presented as truth. Some articles had headlines like FBI agent suspected in Hillary email leaks found dead in apparent murder-suicide.
The site that hosted this article, the Denver Guardian, is no longer hosting stories. Somewhere along the way, the phrase seemed to take on different meaning. Following the intelligence community's conclusion, President Trump made this apparent.
Russia is fake news. This is fake news put out by the media.
Trump's team and his supporters rushed to back him up in the wake of his claims.
Again, the president has made clear he has no interest in Russia, and yet a lot of these stories that come out with respect to that are frankly fake.
But experts and members of the media disagree on what Trump casts as fake news.
President Trump uses the term fake news to describe something with which he does not agree. But that's not actually the term for fake news.
Shippensburg's resident linguist believes that the word fake nullifies the word news.
When you use a term like alternative facts, you're throwing even more confusion into the equation. So I think that it's a remarkably dangerous sort of word usage.
The confusion is cause for concern for SHIP electronic media professor Ted Carlin as well.
We've kind of developed into this system of he said, she said, rather than here's the stories, here's the information. So, yeah, what's the end result? Do we believe anything?
Fake news worries media professionals, but consumers and even the president thinks it stems from bias.
I'm really not a bad person, by the way. No, but the tone is such, I do get good ratings, you have to admit that. The tone is such hatred.
The definition of fake news may not be readily apparent, but what is apparent to former Chicago Tribune copy editor Dr. Kyle Heim is the rift between what fake news means to different people.
I mean, I think the term has kind of become co-opted to a point now where the term fake news is applied to any news that you don't like or that you disagree with, or at least that's been the case, you know, with the White House.
He is the most powerful politician in the world, and he needs to stop saying that everything with which he disagrees is fake.
However, the president's personal Twitter account shows that he has tweeted with the phrase fake news 18 times since his inauguration in January. For SUTV News, I'm Ryan Smetzer.
It has come to light since Trump's comments that Russia hired 1,000 hackers to create fake news sites in battleground states, according to Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Mark Warner. The Russians' contribution to this phenomenon is apparent, but how much they contributed is still an ongoing question.
The Russians only represent one interest in this phenomenon, though. Stories have been featured in publications like the New York Times and NPR about the people who create fake news for financial gain. Whether it be a left-leaning suburban dad who is trying to prove a point, or people in Macedonia who stand to gain nothing from the outcome of the U.S. election, it seems there is more than just politics at play. According to SHIP communication journalism professor Dr. Kyle Heim, the concept behind fake news isn't news at all.
There's always been fake information. There's always been those sites on the web that had fake information. So it seems like it's just recently that it's become this phenomenon.
But false information being presented as news predates even the internet. People have been fabricating information for hundreds of years. One such instance can be traced back to Italy in 1475, when an Italian man blamed Jewish people for the death of an infant. He suggested they drunk the infant's blood as part of a Passover celebration, leading to the torture of 17 Jewish people.
Then came the turn of the century and the problems that surrounded sensational newspaper practices. These practices were later dubbed yellow journalism. The sensationalism found a home in tabloids like the National Enquirer and Weekly World News, eventually making its way to a new medium, the internet.
When we come back, we'll find out how poor media diets affect the way consumers perceive information. Don't go away.
Because if you live on McDonald's, you're going to die of a heart attack in like 15 days. Okay, so the problem that we have is that people are making unhealthy media diet choices.
Welcome back to SUTV News Special Report on Fake News. In 2014, PundaFact checked the validity of 300 separate claims made by political pundits. Of those 300, 150 somewhat or outright false. Only 6 of those claims were corrected on air. Jameson Balker sought to find what this means for how people interpret information.
We've established that fake news isn't new, but something about this most recent iteration must be different to cause such worry.
That's media literacy, and we don't have a whole lot of that. So that's the issue.
Former C-SPAN producer Dr. Allison Dagnes agrees that media literacy is partially to blame.
We are drowning in information and opinion. And so it's really tough. If you turn on any of the cable news channels, it's difficult for your average viewer to distinguish between a journalist and a pundit. A pundit gives their opinion, a journalist gives the facts.
Dagnes also thinks that this confusion has roots in what has been lost in translation.
The evening news, the newspaper, they gave you, by virtue of what their format was, they gave you cues as to what was important.
According to her, this confusion has driven consumers toward an unbalanced consumption of politicized media.
The problem that we have is that people are making unhealthy media diet choices.
Now, Dagnes doesn't believe that news with a slant is necessarily bad, but does think that it can lead to a sticky situation.
A lot of these sites which make you feel good are inaccurate.
The executive director of PolitiFact, Aaron Shirachman, noted that this shift in platforms has not only confused consumers, but also opened the floodgates for citizen journalists.
50 years ago, in order to be a publisher of information, you needed to have a printing press or a satellite antenna or a radio station. Today, because of the advent of the computer and the internet, anyone can publish information at any time.
Shirachman mentioned a lot of good has come from citizen journalism, exemplified by events like the Arab Spring, but he also noted that this has enabled some extremist views.
Hitler took the guns. Stalin took the guns. Mao took the guns. Fidel Castro took the guns. Hugo Chavez took the guns. And I'm here to tell you, 1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
One such outlet, InfoWars, plays host to these views. Founded by Alex Jones, the site, along with his radio show, gathers millions of eyes and ears per week, including the president's.
When Jones posted this video entitled An Emergency Message to Donald Trump during the campaign,
I am going to ask you to seriously think about making the issue of Hillary's election fraud in the primaries one of the central issues to defeating her in November.
Trump had this to say a day later.
I'm afraid the election's going to be rigged, I have to be honest.
Ben Wolfgang, a former White House correspondent for the Washington Times, has interviewed Jones and occasionally checks in on his site. He worries that it has ascended beyond its niche audience.
I mean, Alex Jones and InfoWars certainly over the past year and a half have kind of crossed over from just being that site where conspiracy theorists could go and sort of bounce crazy ideas back and forth into being an actual force.
Jones is known to have pushed false narratives about 9/11, the Sandy Hook shooting, and more recently, a Clinton-connected pedophilia ring.
D.C. police say this North Carolina man, 28-year-old Edgar Madison Welch, was inspired by a lie spread online to walk into this D.C. pizza restaurant with 2 guns Sunday.
A firm believer in free speech, Wolfgang thinks heavily politicized outlets like InfoWars and Breitbart have their place. But he does have a problem when people generalize.
You can't lump the Huffington Post and Breitbart together and say that they're part of the same media collective, because they're not.
Dr. Heim has his objections as well.
It seems like these days when people criticize the news media, they talk about the media as if you can lump all media together. You know, and the term the media encompasses a whole lot of stuff, and not all of it is journalism.
For SUTV News, I'm Jamison Barker.
While fake news can reach a large audience, it rarely impedes people's jobs and personal lives. But it's a different story for the reporters who are up against the consumer who do not trust them. Washington Times reporter Ben Wolfgang experienced this firsthand while out at the bar.
I asked him what he did for a living. He was a bartender at a different bar. He asked me what I did for a living. I told him I was a reporter. I worked at the Washington Times. I was covering the Clinton campaign and the election. And that was the end of the conversation. Literally got up, said he wasn't going to talk to a reporter anymore, and moved to the other end of the bar. And that was it.
The problem exists for reporters at the local level as well. Penn Live reporter Wesley Robinson described a comment he received that disputed his estimation of a crowd size at a pro-immigrant rally in Lancaster.
And the first thing someone did was say, I can't see 2,000 people. Well, I'm out there with my camera phone, and the last thing I'm going to do is give up my position near where all of the event is happening to walk out and show you that there are 2,000 people. But why would I lie to you about that? Like,
Robinson and Wolfgang both noted when people dispute the reporting, their dispute typically is based on anecdotal evidence rather than a point-by-point rebuttal. When we come back, we talk to one of the men combating fake news who says his site was more popular than Tom Brady and Mickey Mouse over the last few months of the election. We'll be right back. Welcome back to SUTV's special report on fake news. Fact checkers are on the front lines of the battle against fake news, and one of the largest is PolitiFact.
PolitiFact has grown exponentially since it got its start in 2007. In 2015, the site had 55 million page views. In the election year of 2016, that number nearly doubled to 114 million views. Ryan Smetzer spoke with PolitiFact's executive director to find out more about this recent surge in viewers and how they are trying to reduce the spread of false information.
During the last few months of the election, PolitiFact had more traffic than NFL.com and Disney.com. PolitiFact Executive Director Aaron Shirachman attributed this rise in viewership to a collective appetite for truth.
I think people want to know simple answers. Is this true or not? And so I think they're looking for outlets that kind of provide that detail in a way that they can trust and kind of can count on.
Though Shirachman acknowledges this desire, he worries about media literacy.
Quite frankly, I don't think we've done a very good job as a society helping people understand the difference between truthful, objective information and then kind of fake information.
He also noted that it isn't always about familiarity with media, but an inherent desire to see the world a certain way.
There's a lot of research suggesting that you have your set of beliefs, and then you'll pick facts that support those beliefs.
This is why PolitiFact goes to painstaking measures to lay out their fact checks. Shirachman said the process starts with a claim.
The first thing we do is we reach out to them or their people and say, you said something, you should have the evidence to back it up, and that's actually an expectation.
Regardless of whether the person in question responds, PolitiFact then begins step 2. According to him, the process can take days.
Ahead and do our independent analysis. We're going to reach out to independent experts wherever they're available. We're going to look for primary sources, not secondary sources. We're going to kind of dig high and low and deep. A typical fact check for us can take 1 to 2 days, so this is not easy, simple work, but we want to make sure we have it right.
Finally, the report goes to a panel of editors to receive its ranking on a spectrum of true to pants on fire false.
The Star Chamber, and that group actually decides what the rating is. So the reporter recommends a rating, but really it's the editors who decide the rating.
Shirachman mentioned that his organization uses this exhausting process to avoid claims of bias.
We want to make sure that that no one person kind of has their hand directly on what the rating is.
But in the end, he knows it's inevitable.
I mean, that's part of the game. This isn't, we're the referees, so to speak, and no one really is rooting for the referees. So that's part of it.
For SUTV News, I'm Ryan Smetzer.
Visit SUTVnews.com to see an extended version of Ryan's interview with Shirachman.
Shirachman mentioned there are even quicker ways to check the validity of a claim or source without even visiting a fact checker. He said simply running a Google search of a headline and critically looking at the organizations publishing the work can do it. According to Shirachman, it's best to avoid work that is not being run by mainstream organizations, citing that in his experience, they are typically more reliable. But if you do have the time, he says there's no substitute for reading the article before you share.
If you look at these stories, the headlines are often eye-grabbing, and they often, again, are playing at an idea that you may have in your head. But if once you click through and read the information, they tend to fall apart.
Dr. Dagnes said you should be conscious of what you're consuming, though. A self-proclaimed left-of-center moderate says she shores up the media diet by reading from outlets that don't agree with her worldview. This way, she ensures that she can form her own opinions rather than simply regurgitate someone else's.
So I urge everybody, balanced media diet, right? If you're a liberal, hop onto some conservative sites, some good ones. Wall Street Journal's magnificent. They do some of the best political reporting out there. Their editorial page is very conservative, and I love reading it.
They're not off the hook by any means, though. Gallup polls showed that trust in media is at an all-time low. Though a lot of factors play into this distrust, many experts pointed toward a lack of transparency that arises when journalists do things like off-the-record sources. Though they acknowledge these practices can be necessary, they thought that being open in this regard could help mend the distrust. Moreover, they say journalists just need to keep their heads down and do quality work.
But I think it would be helpful for readers to understand what are the questions we still have that we're still trying to answer.
What it means to journalists is you have to have good sources, you have to have data, you have to back everything up and be ready to be sued.
I do think that in some ways journalists need to be a little bit better at sort of tooting their own horns and reminding people how important journalism is to society.
Rather than the media directly trying to fight fake news, which I think is kind of a futile effort, quite frankly, I think we should focus on doing our jobs, doing quality, independent, unbiased journalism, and then...
With social media being a highly utilized tool for the spread of false news stories, platforms like Facebook have come under fire for not doing enough.
Originally distancing themselves from the matter, Facebook has become one of the first platforms to try and combat fake news. With their new disputed news flagging tool, Facebook is asking consumers to police content. If a user sees a story they know to be based on false information, they will have the ability to flag it as fake. If a story receives enough flags, it will then be sent to one of 5 independent fact checkers like PolitiFact to assess the information in it. If the story is confirmed as fake, a red warning label will be placed below it when it pops up in your newsfeed. If you're interested in other ways you can prevent the spread of fake news, Facebook also provides an informational guide on how to spot false stories. The link to that article is available at our website, SUTVnews.com.
That concludes our coverage on fake news. We hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and online at SUTVnews.com.